Greetings, students. Welcome to today's symposium. We are exploring work that serves as a continuation of what we started in the previous session, where we looked at the nature of Western philosophy and the historical background of some of the developments that led to this scholarly work. And the module we are working with, of course, is aims and conceptions of education, which is work that is propounded in Western philosophical works. So the theme for this week is understanding the aims and conceptions of education. I am keenly interested in us exploring some of the most provocative discourses that pertain to this amazing. So in us understanding this work, we need to understand that the work serves as what we call a conceptual and a descriptive empirical inquiry of education or into the key conceptions of education. So what I mean by that is that we are exploring what the concept education is, means, and how is it really used. So some of the central philosophical questions we answer in today's class is, firstly, what are the different ways in which the term education is used? Who should determine what education should be? Who controls education? And what is the role of schools in society? To what extent does formal education and informal education distinctively determine how educated one? So we ask ourselves these questions and more, and really that's the central focus of today's session, right? So let's quickly look at the session outline. Firstly, I want for us to recap on the work that was covered in the previous session. And then I want us to then look at the dimensions of the concept of education, the dimensions and control of education. So how do the dimensions or uses of the concept education relate to the question who controls education? So I want us to look into that. We'll then also think about the role of schools in connection to these dimensions of education. Then, of course, we'll cover some quick announcements, and that will be the end of the session. So that's what we are looking at this week's class. Without wasting time, let's look into a brief recap into a session that you had previously at WITS and in the institution PSI. So the question that was of focus in the previous class was, what is politics? What is philosophy? It's political philosophy. What is education? It's philosophy of education. May take a moment to pause the video and write up a short description. Okay. When we look at the question, what is politics? Covered that a definition of politics from a descriptive side. So there is a conciliatory perspective of a description of what politics is. And that's the description that tends to politics as the art of the possible. So we say politics pertains a description of one's ability to do something and one's inability to not do something. So it just looks at the manifestation of things into society. So that's a conciliatory perspective. Also looked at the cynical perspective. And that one has a lot to do with governance. So politics is the art of governance of mankind through deceiving them. So again, that's another perspective. Say that politics pertains one being in a governance role in society and what they choose to do that role in influence their broader constituents. Then we also look at the willfully assertive perspective of what politics is. So that's the art of carrying a nation for its earthly existence. That's another perspective. So politics pertains taking people through the process of life, influencing their livelihood, their social standing within their society. Yeah. So that's just another way to look at politics. And two more perspectives is that politics pertains recognition and reconciliation, conflicting interests, differences in the society. So that's just another way to look at politics. So we say it's politics is either conciliatory, it's either cynical, willfully assertive, or one that has to do with the recognition or reconciliation. But the common thing is that in all five perspectives, it has everything to do with interactions or an influence into the interactions of people within society. So that's what politics are and what they entail. Now, the second question we ask ourselves is, what is philosophy? So we understand what politics is, but then what is philosophy? So aims and conceptions of education, as I said, is a fragment or a module that seeks to study philosophy of education from broadly a Western perspective. Now, etymologically, philosophy, as we covered in the past, means wisdom, right? Now, we said that the word philo is a Greek word that means love, and Sophia, the word that means wisdom. So philosophy, in etymological sense, entails love of wisdom. So philosophy then has to do with everything pertaining to knowledge and wisdom is defined as knowledge and truth. Then the third question you had to respond then is when you compound the two, philosophy and politics, what do you get? You get political philosophy. So then the broader question then that we ask is, what is political philosophy? Well, political philosophy, it's a study or it's a branch of knowledge, wisdom, where we explore aspects of the question of control, say who decides on what should or what is the best course for a society, and decides how societal goods are distributed. So political philosophy then entails us responding to the question of who gets what, who gave jurisdiction to the the one who decided who gets what, have that sense of power and control within the society. So when we're looking at political philosophy, then we are really questioning how societal goods are distributed. We are questioning citizenship rights, questioning aspects of civil rights, aspects of who should be allowed to say what within a society. So freedom of speech. Think about aspects of political rights again. Who should decide which party must be in office? Also look at social rights, which pertains to who decides who gets an education. So politics is also broadly about power and control. So in political philosophy, we to control and power, and how is power in society? Is it given to the state? Is it given to the parents? Is it given? Think about all these perspectives to broadly create understanding of our stance within a society. Then goes to the question of education, right? What is education? In a broader philosophical sense, from a political philosophy perspective, we say education is social good, but valuable society, and broadly then also entails power distribution that is into question of control of this social good. And look at it from a philosophy of education perspective, we say that it's something that is intrinsically. Education is what it is. That's another way of thinking of what education is, or how we choose to define what is philosophy of education. That's when we intertwine what this the study of what is intrinsically valuable, the broader subsequent effects of our understanding of education. So we look at question of control in relation of value. So we're looking at how does value of education for its own sake get to be intertwined with the question of what's this education. So there are some parallel and then is most important, how is politics and understand the relationship politics and education. So if you think about politics and politics, say that politics hold a symbiotic relationship with education. That's something that explored in the previous, right? Said that politics and education have some symbiosis, which means what happens within the education institution influences what happens in the politics. This was boldly broken down. The knowledge frameworks that are made within the education institution directly govern what goes on within politics. So does have an symbiotic sense that what happens in politics then also has direct implication, and politics also has direct jurisdiction of the funding of what happens with parties. So these two have a direct imbalance. But an argument that was raised as well is that politics and education can also hold a parasitic. Now, how can that come to? This happens when the interests of politics not relate to the core function of education. So the value of education for its own sake gets to be stripped somehow. Then the relationship gets parasitic because politics is the one that gets to benefit at the expense of the education itself. So it becomes parasitic because now it's a one-way relationship. So there are no, there's no backlog or a cyclical kind of between the two. Then leads to us asking the question. Then leads to us asking the question. Then, what is education for? What are the aims of education? Which is the central component of what to discuss is. So I want us to look into a conceptual analysis of trying to understand the aims of education. So, and how do we use the term education? Now, if you look at Ham's 1980 work, which is central to he define or describe the uses of education into three dimensions. First dimension being education one, the sociological use. So here we argue that education is what is used for the benefit of society. The second component is the institutional use of education. Say that education centralizes a formal institution, while the sociological use focuses on the informal fraternity. It's one that benefits from this education. And the last component, which is the most complex, sort of new perspective of conceptions of education, is general enlightenment use of education. Now, if you think about the three uses, I put them into an upside down pyramid of sorts, and I put them in order of complexity. Right? Now, general enlightenment is the most complex and the more broader use of education. Theoretically, explore this as we continue this. Have a sociological use of education. So this one looks at it's the second broadest one because it's any coming from other social institutional ones what we are related to education from school. Now, what is the sociological view? I've quoted a paper by Dr. Madila 20, and he puts it in this way. He says that the sociological view places an emphasis socializing the child into the existing family norms and practices. So what this means is that the idea education does not only take place in a formal school, neither does it mean formal teaching on them. So that's what sociological. education argues to say. And if you look at the next component here is that what we are getting then is from the sociological view of education, the focus really is on socializing norms and right socializing norms and practices into the society. And we branch this socialization of norms and practices into two. There's a primary socialization, which is really the focus that supports the sociological view, which is the perspective that more learning happens at home instead of a formal school, uh, such as what the secondary socialization compartment would argue. Now, what we also note about the sociological view is that there is little value being put to knowledge and truth, right? Remember, I spoke about how in philosophy, we're looking at wisdom, and wisdom connotes to knowledge and truth. So, from a sociological view of education, there is little interest in the validity or truthfulness or goodness or worthwhileness of the knowledge that is being shared through this process of socialization. Rather, um, the focus is then to say one must be acculturated, socially acculturated into the society, into the norms and values of the society, because they are expected to fill in or fit into certain social responsibilities at a certain time. So that's why sociological view will put an interest on, right? And if we continue to think about the uses of education going into education two, being the institutional view of education. Again, Matebula describes it this way. He says that the institutional notion refers to the development of a person as a result of influences from schools and other formal institutions. So, for example, whatever goes on in schools is something that exists in tandem with the official goals of schooling. So that's one perspective. So according to the institutional view of education, then the development of a person happens as a result of formal institutional influences. So the belief here is that education can only happen, be found, or be gained through formal institution, and that everyone who has gone through these institutions are deemed to be similarly educated. So according to this view, if you went to a school, then you are educated. But then there are controversies where people say, but all this education or all this schooling wasn't worthwhile, which then complexifies education in a sense, which brings us to education three, which is the general enlightenment view of education. So according to this view, we say that schooling or education, it does not necessarily refer to socialization nor attendance of formal schooling. So general enlightenment, simply put, is neither E1 or E2. It's neither socialization nor institutional use. So it then argues that education goes beyond socialization and formal schooling. So instead, education is a form of human achievement that is intrinsically valuable, and it puts focus in learning as the development of the mind as a result of different forms of knowledge, right? And it is characterized by knowledge and understanding facets described by the different criterions made reference to by Harm, right? So in this view, what is deemed to be educational goes um, beyond what comes as directly afflicted to the mind, right? So education in this view connotes to having a holistic understanding, a holistic view of their lives. So what we're getting from these three uses then is that education, the concept is connoted by compartments or components of society, which is the sociological use, components of the institutions of learning, which is the institutional use, components of neither the two, which is general enlightenment, which then leads to us asking the question, what then is education? Because now we're getting a sense that it can neither be E1 or E2. Then what is it if it's not if it's neither E1 or E2? So of course, this then takes us to Peter's analysis. And in his analysis, he makes us understand that there are complexities or technicalities involved rather in the understanding of the term education, right? So firstly, what Peters highlights is that education is what results from having engaged in a series of activities that lead to one being educated. So in that sense, education is central to being deliberate and initiated. So what is deemed to be educational, firstly, involves practice. So which means there are certain activities that you must be involved in. The second thing that's related to, or you need to take into account when defining what education is the deliberateness and the initiation component. So Peter's analysis says education is the deliberate attempt on the part of someone, which is a teacher, to initiate someone else, being the student, into an unknown world of knowledge, understanding, and practice. So it does uh, involve initiation and deliberateness from the part of the learner and the teacher, the initiator. And we see that then what this connotes to the practice, deliberateness, and initiation, then leads to central attributes, which are the criterions that Ham makes reference to say combatly how we define education is dependent on value and desire as a criterion, knowledge and procedure as a criterion. So we need to take all of those into account when we are trying to define what education is, right? Which I would like for us to sort of branch and expand or broadly explore, right? So the first criterion is desire or value criterion. Now, here the argument is that acquiring education is getting something worthwhile and desirable to the self. So basically, the argument here is to say that you cannot say you are educated while you haven't gotten something that is worthwhile and desirable. So you need to benefit. There needs to be an achievement of sorts associated with you being educated, right? So to say that a person is reformed is to say that he has become better. So by education, by us looking at desire and valuability, we say that when you are educated, you need to have become better in a sense. So hence in the E3 sense, education means human achievement and the development due to the descriptive value of education. So